Welcome to another episode of Serial Streamers. I'm Jami Rice, I'm your host, and if you don't know what Serial Streamers is, let me explain. It is a true crime TV club for people who just love to binge all the true crime documentaries out there. I certainly do. It's kind of like a book club, but it's a club for people who binge true crime documentaries on TV instead. And we meet virtually every couple of weeks on Instagram, so make sure you're following me at Jami on Air. That's Jami on Air on Instagram, because every couple of weeks I go on Instagram, I announce the docuseries watch assignment for the Serial Streamers. I give you about like a week for all of us to watch it, and then we come back to Instagram a week after that, and I open up the chat. We talk about the documentary, give your thoughts, your theories, how many times you rolled your eyes, because inevitably that does happen with these documentaries. But yeah, that's what Serial Streamers is. I would love for you to join the club. It's super easy to do. Just follow me on Instagram. But before we get into the documentary that we're going to cover on this episode of Serial Streamers, I need to offer a disclaimer, a trigger warning. This documentary, this story does involve sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, as well as, I would imagine, religious trauma for a lot of people. So this one may not be for everybody, but I think it's an interesting one. And so I just wanted to let you guys know, kind of heed this warning and take care before listening or watching. Okay, so we are going to cover the documentary that I announced last week that we just got done watching is going to be Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, and it's on Amazon Prime. Now, I know I say this every time, but really this time, I rolled my eyes so far into the back of my head, they damn near got stuck. I almost needed surgery. So many things about this story and this family. I'm sorry if I'm being aggressive, but it just gives me the ick. And a lot of things that happen within the organization that this family is a part of is disgusting. So again, trigger warning, but let's get into it. So this docuseries takes place in Arkansas. The documentary highlights the Duggar family, and that is Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. Of course, his name is Jim Bob, okay? But Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and their gigantic family. I think as of today's date, the Duggar family are up to 19 kids, and I don't know. I don't want to judge anybody, but hopefully there's no more kids coming. I think they should maybe be done with that for a while. But it's the Duggar family. It's Jim Bob. It's Michelle Duggar. They are a married couple. And as of this date, they have 19 children. And the documentary is somewhat not narrated by, but it features one of the Duggar children in particular. She's an adult now. Her name is Jill Duggar, and she is the fourth born Duggar child. And it also features her husband as well. They participate in the documentary, and they are a bit on the outs with the Duggar family, and we'll get into that. But basically, they said that they participated in this documentary because they wanted to tell their own story from their perspective and not have a tabloid do it. So it seems like they almost felt forced to participate in this documentary. But I have to say that I'm glad that they did, because I think they offered a lot of insight on the Duggar family and the organization that they're a part of, which again, we'll get into, and really what went on in that family. And to me, it's deeply, deeply disturbing. Now, the Duggar family might sound familiar to you because this large family starred in 17 Kids and Counting, which aired on TLC in 2008. And they get more famous, as time goes on, but that is really what made the family famous, was that show on TLC. It started out as 17 Kids and Counting, but it grew because Michelle kept having babies. So the documentary talks about the fact that the Duggar family, Jim, Bob, and Michelle, as well as their children, they are a part of this organization called the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP for short. Now, this is a Christian organization, and it serves as an umbrella organization for several other ministries, which were established by the American Christian minister by the name of Bill Gothard. And he began I'm going to call it his reign, but he began his, ministries back in 1961. And this Bill Gothard guy, you're going to find out, or you did if you watch the docuseries, he's a real piece of shit. So yeah, we'll get into more on him in a little bit. So the documentary highlights the fact that the Duggar family are really the poster child for IBLP. They are its most famous members. And you often see Jim Bob and Michelle on stage talking at these IBLP conventions or speaking engagements or whatever it is. And, so many times you see in the footage, Jim Bob, who's really like the patriarch. You're going to find out that this is just a very patriarchal society that they live in, that he's like the head of the family, right? And submissive Michelle is standing by his side on stage and just like, gleaming up in awe of her husband, who's in charge and just like the end all be all, like he knows everything. And it just, I don't know. It just rages against everything that I would want in my life. I can't imagine, we're going to get into it. Sorry, so many things about this. Okay. So, but yeah, she's just a very submissive wife. And she kind of looks up at her husband while he's talking, like as if he's just the most knowledgeable person in the world. And everything he says is just golden. And IBLP, this organization, and the Duggars, they've adopted everything that the IBLP teaches, really stands for kind of like, have as many children as possible in order to spread the word of Jesus Christ. And then I thought, is that what Nick Cannon's doing? I don't know how many children Nick Cannon has at this point, but I literally am wondering, is there a purpose for him having so many kids? Like, is he really trying to spread his seed so that little Nick Cannons all around the world go and spread whatever word he stands for? I really don't know, but it just made me think of Nick Cannon. And God, I bet you his life is just like ripe for a show. Does he have a reality show? Oh my God. Okay, so Alexis just confirmed Nick Cannon has 12, which pales in comparison to the 19 that the Duggars have. But he's getting there. And I think he's still young enough to just maybe surpass them at some point. Anyway, the IBLP organization is really a patriarchal, authoritarian organization, yuck, that where women really don't have rights within this organization. They are subservient to their husbands. The children are taught to be obedient. It is the absolute opposite. It's my personal nightmare. I cannot imagine growing up that way where, women don't have rights, especially in today's day and age. It's like this organization still exists today. And here are the Duggars just adopting every toxic thing that it teaches and just keeping women down, keeping, your young girls down and robbing them of any kind of independence and real education in life, as you'll see when we get into it. And, they're very big on homeschooling, no television for the children, very conservative dress. You often saw Michelle Duggar wearing those long ass skirts with their long ass hair that she never cut, with her long ass shirt, with her they just have to cover up every inch of their body, which again just gives me the ick, because you're going to find out there's a reason why women have to dress so conservatively that it covers their body in this society that they live in. Even so much that like the women aren't supposed to show their shoulders, which what the fuck? Like showing your shoulders, like what is that going to do? It makes no sense to me. And obviously women should be able to wear whatever the hell they want to wear, and nothing should ever happen to them because of that. But unfortunately, they are really grooming these young girls to essentially not give boys or men any reason to do something inappropriate to them. That's really where this is going. And the Duggars television show, 17 Kids and Counting, really helped to thrust the organization IBLP's motives to put members of the organization in really high-powered government positions so that they could bring the country back to where it should be. So Jim Bob and Michelle, they met in the 1980s and said in the documentary that they bonded over God. And during one speech at an IBLP organization event, Jim Bob explains on stage that Michelle used to date people and she used to be a cheerleader, but that's when she didn't know any better. So Michelle, you're saying, was a typical average young woman who dated people and was a cheerleader. But so he's referencing it as, she used to do those things that are for bad people, but that's when she didn't know any better, right? Because essentially, in this conservative organization, you're not really supposed to date. You're supposed to marry and be monogamous with that one person. You're not supposed to date multiple people or different people throughout your life to figure out who's best for you. It's like typically the patriarch of the family is like serving up a mate for his daughters, and like you just take it and you don't question it. So he says this on stage, like, yeah, Michelle was, cheerleading and dating people, but that's back when she knew better. And like Michelle's just like looking up at him and she's like, yes, honey, you're right. Like she's just affirming everything that he says. And it just made me want to vomit. Now, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, they married at age 17 and 19, Michelle being 17, Jim Bob being 19. And I guess Michelle early on had a miscarriage, and they blamed the pill on her having a miscarriage. So from there forward, they basically procreated like rabbits with no regard for Michelle's physical health, well-being. And I say that in all honesty, that's how I feel. They said that the reason she had the miscarriage was because she was taking the pill. And whether you believe that's possible or not, that's not my argument. It's that from there forward, they were like, okay, we're going to be anti-pill and we're just going to let God decide how many children we have. But to me, it's an extremely dangerous thing to do to a woman's body for her to have 19 children in total. And you would see that they actually would have had a 20th, but they did unfortunately lose a child. The baby did not have a heartbeat. So I just can't imagine allowing a woman to get pregnant that many times and carry a child that many times and give birth that many times. I just think that it's reckless and it sounds agonizing. As a woman, like it just sounds absolutely agonizing to have to carry forward with that many births. Just my opinion. And again, like I said earlier, the Duggars rationalized that, essentially they just let God decide how many children they were going to have. They just kind of let it flow, leave it up to God. Whether or not it is a danger to Michelle's body, we're just going to let God decide. And in fact, I believe it was Michelle's parents, but one of the sets of grandparents, so either Jim Bob and or Michelle's parents, did raise a concern and said, we're worried about Michelle's health if she continues to have children this way. Now, Jim Bob Duggar, he served as a Republican member of the State House of Representatives in the 1990s and the 2000s. So he was into politics. And in 2002, he ran for Senate, but he did lose that bid. Now, let's talk about how the Duggars got famous. So how it all came about, how this TV show on TLC all came about. So Discovery Health Network became aware of the Duggars through an article that they were featured in Parents Magazine. So in 2004, that article in Parents Magazine leads to a documentary called 14 Kids and Pregnant Again. So obviously, as the name insinuates, Michelle, they had 14 kids at that time, and Michelle was pregnant again, as that documentary came out. So in 2004, the Duggars had 14 children, which included 2 sets of twins, and Michelle was pregnant with another child at that time. Now in 2008, that's when 17 Kids and Counting became a TV show on TLC. And that's when the Duggars really got famous and became very well known. And the documentary features a man named Jim and his wife, Bobby. So Jim and Bobby Holt. They are very good friends of Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. Now, in the documentary, Jim and Bobby Holt talk about the fact that Bobby was 14 years old when they began dating, whereas Jim was 19 years old when they began dating. So obviously this is an issue. But of course, Jim explains it away, and he says that she, his wife Bobby, was very well developed. And I thought she was 18. Okay, bro. Like, nice try trying to explain away that you're an adult having relations with a 14-year-old. And I'm sorry, I know that's probably triggering to people, but that is what they talk about in the documentary, and that is what happened. And he tries to explain it away by saying she was very well developed, as if that's an excuse. And I don't buy it that, I thought she was 18. Cool, you knew at some point she wasn't 18, and you kept going. Maybe because she was well developed, and that just gave you permission. That means she's kind of an old soul, maybe, or I don't know, I'm making shit up, but that bothered me. So, but these are very good friends of the Duggars, Jim Bob and Michelle, and they're featured pretty heavily in this documentary. And we're going to learn more about this Jim character, Jim Holt, later in this series. The Holt's daughter, her first boyfriend was Josh Duggar, which is the firstborn child of Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. And the documentary talks about the fact that, you know, with the Duggars becoming famous on TLC in that show, the evangelicals finally have representation on TV, which is like a big deal for them. But at the same time, the Duggars and evangelicals on TV also have like hate watchers who call them fundies, which I guess I learned in the documentary is a derogatory term for fundamentalists. So you have people who are just like, yes, we finally have representation with the Duggar family being evangelicals and being on this, you know, hit TV show. But then you have people watching going, oh my God, look at these fundies. Now, the man that I mentioned earlier, Bill Gothard, he is the head of the IBLP Institute, and he and his institute, but especially him, because he creates all the teachings that are then taught to all the members of this organization. Bill Gothard and the IBLP Institute teaches how to parent. And they teach you how to discipline your children, you know, how to retain authority. You know, everyone is not on the same level. It is very much a hierarchy in this institution. It is men at the top, you know, and then everybody else falls below them. And especially if you're a woman, you barely even matter, it seems, in this institution. What's interesting about the fact that Bill Gothard, there's a lot of things that are interesting about the fact that this guy was teaching other people how to live, which is extremely problematic if you know his past, which we're going to get into. But the dude has never been married and he's never had kids. Yet here he is teaching you how to parent, how to gain authority over your children, how to keep your children submissive and obedient, how to discipline your children. But he's never been married and doesn't have kids. But that's not even the most alarming part about this dude being in charge of anything. We'll get into it. And Jim Bob Duggar is heavily influenced by Gothard. Essentially, you know, they both believe, and the entire institute believes, that you need to have as many kids as God will bless you with. In 2012, Michelle Duggar is expecting her 20th child, but as I mentioned earlier, the baby unfortunately did not have a heartbeat, and the baby does not survive. And Josh Duggar, meanwhile, Josh Duggar, the oldest Duggar child, is getting into politics just like his father. And he becomes a lobbyist for conservative values. And in 2015, this is when shit hits the fan with the Duggars. Some of their skeletons are going to start to come out. In 2015, there was an anonymous letter that was sent to the Oprah show, who then, somebody from the Oprah show, then turned that letter over to authorities. And the letter was in regard to Josh Duggar, the oldest Duggar child. And the letter explains that he is a sexual abuser of children. And, you know, the person at the Oprah show takes this very seriously and passes the letter on to authorities. And it comes out in the documentary. And of course, I had heard this in the news before I watched this documentary. And again, trigger warning. At the age of 14, maybe to 15 years old, Josh Duggar forcibly touched, so he molested 4 or 5 girls, which included 2 of his sisters. Now, in reaction to these accusations against Josh Duggar, his father, Jim Bob, and Jim Bob's really good friend, Jim Holt, they take 15-year-old Josh Duggar to a state trooper where he confesses what he'd done to the state trooper. And in the end, the state trooper just kind of says, all right, young man, you know, and I'm paraphrasing. All right, young man, you're going to get off with a warning. I'm going to let you go this time, but you better stay on the right track. Well, lo and behold, it turns out this state trooper was a good friend of Jim Bob's. So in reality, Jim Bob and his friend Jim Holt are just trying to keep up appearances. They're trying to make it look like they are dealing with this situation with Josh Duggar. They are alarmed enough to take his own son to a member of law enforcement to confess everything he did, and let's just leave it up to law enforcement as far as what they want to do with him. Well, this state trooper was a very good friend of Jim Bob's, and this was just all for show. This was just to make it look like they were doing the right thing, they were handling the situation, but it was just to keep up appearances, all for show. So it turns out this state trooper was a really good friend of Jim Bob's, and everything was just for show. Such bullshit. And okay, so that same state trooper that's a good friend of Jim Bob's and who let Josh Duggar off with a, just a slap on the wrist, turns out later that he ends up being sentenced to over 50 years in prison for none other than child pornography. So this is not a good dude. And clearly, one sexual predator comes in, being Josh Duggar, to confess what he's done, and another sexual predator, a member of law enforcement, just lets him off. They're just two predators in a pod. And this guy's now in prison for 50 years for his crimes. And you'll find out that, Josh also doesn't fare so well down the road. Also, I have to stop here and say something really quick. So we just took a quick break and my assistant Alexis is here and she was adjusting the camera and she made sure to point out that I am wearing my Fundy skirt today. Which I'm going to have to somehow incorporate when we're done recording. I will do a full shot video of what I'm wearing today. And you guys can decide if I'm a Fundy or not. But I am wearing quite a long and conservative skirt today. So she also pointed out that my shoulders are covered as well. So maybe I am very on brand for this. I was just trying to get into the mood for this documentary. But what I will point out is that my boobs were essentially pouring out of the last video that we did. And that was not on purpose. I'm actually somebody who really doesn't even I'm totally going down a rabbit hole here. I'm going on a left turn. I'm not somebody who really wears a lot of cleavage. It's just not my bag. But they just sometimes it happens. And it did happen in the last video. So maybe I'm making up for last time and wearing my Fundy outfit, okay? Thank you, Alexis, for pointing that out. I really appreciate it. Anywho, so amid the sex predator scandal with Josh Duggar, the oldest of the Duggar children, the Duggars end up sending Josh to the Gothard Facility for Troubled Boys. And again, this is something run by Bill Gothard, which I can tell you, this is not going to do any good for anybody. But anyway, they send him away, as one does when your child is accused of doing horrendous things to young girls. And of course, the Duggars, Jim, Bob, and Michelle Duggar, tell people that about their son after they sent him away. They say something like, he's away building houses for people in need. So they're trying to paint him as this giving and kind person amid these horrible, molestation allegations. It just pisses me off when you are deflecting and you have got a teenage child who's committed horrendous acts against your own daughters and other young girls. And yet you're trying to gaslight everybody by saying, well, look at him. He's now, building houses for people in need. He's really a great boy. Fuck that. I just get so pissed when I see them not really dealing with the issue at hand, because it's extremely dangerous to have a teenage boy committing these acts. And you're not doing anything to protect the public. You're not doing anything to protect your own daughters. You're just masking the situation so that everybody thinks that you're holier than thou and your family's next to perfect. And I just can't. I get really pissed off when I see things like that and behavior like that. I understand it's not a comfortable thing for any parent to have to deal with a child who's doing these things, but you do have a duty to protect your other children and the public. And I just think they failed miserably at this. And Jim Bob makes it absolutely worse because he further minimizes Josh's actions. He says in an interview something like, he's curious about girls and he touched them over their clothes and they didn't even know it happened. So again, he's trying to make it seem like it's really not that bad. But if you have to say that your child molester son touched girls over their clothes, not under, but over, and they didn't even know it happened, then you know that it's bad, right? If you're having to give those details, and who knows if that's true, it doesn't really matter. What he did should never be minimized, and you should never give details like that to try and make it seem like it's just not that bad. And 2015 brings just even more scandal for Josh Duggar specifically. So in 2015, Josh Duggar is outed by Gawker for having multiple subscriptions to Ashley Madison. It's an affair website. If you're not familiar, it's a website for people who are married but who are seeking affairs with maybe either other married people or not married people. I'm not sure exactly how it works. But Josh Duggar was married at the time. So Gawker exposed him. So it's just even more stain on the Duggar family in 2015. And this creates a brand new controversy, and it made people start to take a closer look at the Duggar family. Now, there's something called ATI. ATI is IBLP's homeschooling training program. And in this ATI homeschooling program, they use wisdom booklets over actual educational books to teach the children. And these wisdom booklets, they teach obedience, persuasiveness, evolution is unscientific. And essentially inside of these wisdom booklets are just a lot of conjecture from Bill Gothard, who is the leader of the IBLP. It's just a lot of conjecture of what is swirling around in his toxic brain. He then goes and throws up onto these wisdom booklets. And that is what these people, these families, these parents within the IBLP are using to teach their children versus fact-based education. And it's just absolutely alarming to me because, again, it goes back to my previous comment where you're just robbing these children of a real education, which is going to rob them down the road of reaching their full potential successfully. If they want to be independent, if they want to know about the world, they want to know, based on facts. You're literally throwing at them these wisdom booklets that are just created out of thin air by Bill Gothard, who we're going to find out, spoiler alert, who is a sexual predator. It's alarming. This is what they were using to teach the children within the IBLP. And the IBLP, Bill Gothard, and these wisdom booklets, they teach that rock music is traced back to satanic rituals, and they say that the rock beat is evil. Well, then I'm going straight to hell because I love me some rock and roll. I like some explicit rap music. I like all of it. So I guess I'm going straight to hell, but anywho. Now, this is where it got really hard for me to watch. In the documentary, they talk about they being like the IBLP. Basically, they teach that the way that women dress sometimes, like maybe in my last video, creates eye traps for men. Meaning, like if you're showing too much shoulder, showing too much leg, showing too much anything, you're creating an eye trap for a man that he just can't get out of. He's going to stare, and he might even go further, but that's your fault for wearing clothes that show your skin. And it's just mind-boggling. This is what they teach. And in these wisdom booklets, they have these little like tests for the girls especially that say, can you spot the eye trap? So they show pictures of women dressed in various ways, and you're supposed to go, oh, there's the eye trap. And it's like a woman wearing something that maybe shows her neck or shows her shoulders, or maybe it shows the bottom half or the upper half of her legs. And that apparently is an eye trap that she's creating for men and boys who just can't get out of it. They just can't help themselves. They're going to stare at you. So these young boys within this organization and this lifestyle, they're being taught to take zero accountability for their sexually devious actions. The girls are taught, on the other hand, that it's their fault if a boy or a man sexually abuses them. Well, maybe they could have dressed differently. Maybe they shouldn't have created an eye trap for the man. And this is so dangerous to be raising boys this way who will eventually become men. And there's just so many issues with raising a boy that way. And for the girls in this lifestyle and under this organization, they're essentially raising their younger siblings. So these families are having so many kids, and the girls in large part at a very young age, I'm talking like 7-8-year-old girls, are essentially raising babies and toddlers because their mom is like overwhelmed or whatever, but this is just part of their lifestyle. The girls raise their younger siblings. And again, that can be very dangerous. I've covered stories on Murderish before where there is, to a certain extent, I have 3 children, and to a certain extent, yeah, sometimes you tell the older one, hey, keep an eye on your sister real quick. I've got to run into the kitchen to get this or that. I'm making scenarios up. But if you're having a 7 or an 8-year-old child be almost like a parent and be responsible for most of the day for these young children, they're not equipped, or mature enough to really keep a close eye. And there's times when, a baby has drowned in a pool. And I hate to bring this is so dark, but those are real life scenarios. It's a very dangerous thing to act like a 7 or 8-year-old child is equipped to be a parent to a baby or a toddler or any child younger than them. I just don't think it's fair. And, parents are downright abusive within this IBLP community. Now, I can't say that every single parent is abusive, but there is abuse in this community, and it's bred from the teachings of Bill Gothard and the IBLP, showing how to discipline using objects, and spankings, hard spankings with objects are encouraged. And they call these spankings encouragement. So they're masking something that is borderline or downright abusive as something positive. It's encouragement for your children to hit them with a rod. That's abuse. That's not encouragement. That's abuse. To hit your child with an object, let's not mince words. That's abuse. And really, kids they're not allowed to say no. They have to be obedient. And really, within this culture, they are breaking the kids' will. That's part of their goal, is to break the children's will until they are absolutely obedient at all times. But they call it training, and they call it encouragement. They talk about in the documentary a man named Michael and Debbie Pearl, who authored a book titled To Train Up a Child. This book, apparently I haven't read it, is all about how to spank your children and not get detected by police. You can spank them with a rod or anything, and you must teach them full obedience. Children have to be fully obedient to their parents, and that's apparently what this book teaches. And the Duggars, they've admitted to spanking their children with rods, and they call it encouragement. And again, like I said, they're masking downright abuse as something positive, and it's not. There's nothing positive about being hit with an object. Now, again, I want to offer another trigger warning, because there is something called blanket training within this lifestyle that the Duggars also practice. And apparently, blanket training is when you put something, and I'm talking, they do blanket training for babies, 6-month-old babies. They lay the baby down and they put something that the baby wants just out of reach of the child. And then as soon as the child gets close to getting the object they want, you hit the baby before they're able to reach it. And Michelle Duggar wrote about blanket training in her book, and she smiles and laughs as she's describing blanket training. She says that when it's time for her kids to go do blanket training, she tells them, get your favorite toy. It's time for blanket training. Which in reality, you're going to go lay the baby down and you're going to put something that they want just out of reach, and you're going to strike them if they get close to reaching it, because you're breaking their will. I'm talking even babies. That I cannot believe that they speak openly about this and nothing's been done. To me, this is just downright abuse. No baby needs to have its will broken that way. No child needs to have its will broken that way. I see no good that is going to come out of that. But what does come out of that is an extremely obedient and submissive child, which is what they want. And in my eyes, as I'm watching this documentary, the IBLP, the ATI, which is the homeschooling training, as well as Bill Gothard, their teachings are breeding the perfect victim for other predators. You are raising, especially girls, you're raising them to be meek, quiet, uneducated, obedient, and dependent. And that, in my eyes, is breeding the perfect victim for other predators to go and take advantage of. And I don't want to mince words here. I strongly believe that this is an extremely dangerous environment to bring kids up in this way, especially girls, because we all know that girls and women are the victim most often in sex crimes. And the way that you're raising boys as if they should take no accountability for the way that they gawk at women and girls, their actions toward women and girls, what they say toward women and girls, if they might be wearing the wrong thing, is, again, you're breeding predators and victims. Is the way I see it is you're breeding predators, future predators, and you're breeding future victims. And it's just disgusting to me. It's the absolute opposite of what we should be teaching our children, to stay safe as they get older, as much as humanly possible, right? Because it's not all fully in our control. But also to not be a fucking predator when you get older. It's a double-edged sword in this organization, that it's just a breeding ground for predators and victims. That's really the only way that I can put it. Now, in this culture, women really are not supposed to say no to a man who wants to be in a relationship with them. Essentially, if a man wants to court you and wants to be in a relationship with you, women most often just adjust to it and they make it work. And that is encouraged in this society that they live in. In 2015, it's bad news for the Duggars. TLC goes ahead and cancels their show, 19 Kids and Counting, amid the Josh Duggar scandal. But they want to keep things going, because this is essentially a cash cow for TLC, and it's a cash cow for Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. And they both want to keep this going. So what do? They create Jill and Jessa Counting Back. Jill and Jessa being sisters within the Duggar family. And these sisters, Jill and Jessa, they felt like they had to do this new spinoff show. It's not that they just wanted to have their own spinoff show. The gravy train needed to keep moving, and the money needed to keep coming in, especially for Jim Bob. This is how he supported his family, off the backs of his children and exposing, their lifestyle. And whether his daughters Jill and Jessa wanted to do this spinoff show, they were going to do it because Jim Bob's in charge and Jim Bob needs to make a buck. And the girls were essentially pressured to be breadwinners for the family. They were taken advantage of, in my opinion. And they did not, one of the girls, I think it was Jill, she's an adult now, she says in this documentary that, my sister and I didn't even get to be involved in any of the contract meetings between TLC and their father, Jim Bob. Instead, Jim Bob takes these meetings and he decides, that the girls are going to do this and this is what they're going to get paid. But you're going to see that they didn't get the money for it. Jim Bob got the money for the show. He was running this thing. And the girls also say that they did not receive any of the money from the spinoff show. All the money went to their father, Jim Bob. Make that make sense. And at some point, Jim Bob presents a man for his daughter, Jill. So Jill is the one who's featured pretty heavily in the documentary. He presents a man for a courtship. And, again, this just goes back to this being a patriarchal, authoritarian organization, lifestyle, where, a man really controls everything and the women really have no rights. They have no say in anything. And, the father is really controlling his daughter's life and her future, saying, here's the man that you're going to marry. He's presenting and knowing that the daughter really can't say no. And during this time, Jill explains in the documentary that the day before she's going to get married, Jim Bob, her father, presents her with this contract, just kind of like in passing, like, oh, here's the contract, sign it, just basically don't read it. I know you're in a hurry because you're getting married tomorrow. Just you don't need to look at this, just sign it. And she does sign it, but she doesn't really know what it was at the time. And it turns out it was a commitment for 5 more years to film the spinoff show. That, again, Jill was not part of these network meetings and she didn't know what she was signing at the time. Her father just put it in front of her, which essentially committed her to 5 more years of being the breadwinner for the Duggar family, generating income, being the star of this spinoff show. But she's not going to see a dollar. It's all going to go to Jim Bob. Now, Jill says in the documentary she became pregnant 30 days after she got married. she asked TLC, the network, to pay her and her husband enough to cover medical insurance because they're about to have a baby. And TLC responds saying, "We paid the family," which means, yes, they paid the family, but the money went to Jim Bob. It didn't go to Jill or her sister Jessa. So she's doing all this work. She's the star of the show along with her sister, but they're not making the money off of it. And she's about to have a baby and she can't even get enough to cover medical insurance because the money's in her dad's pocket. Now, more information comes out in the documentary about Bill Gothard, the head of the IBLP, as well as his brother, Steve Gothard. And essentially there are sex abuse allegations that come out against Steve Gothard. Now, Bill has a solution for this. Bill's solution is that his brother, Steve, should marry the woman that he's accused of sexually abusing. Because essentially, if you're married, it's not sexual abuse, and then that makes it go away. Well, the board of the IBLP, that's enough is enough for them. And they say, no, that's going too far. That's highly inappropriate. Oh, but Bill has another solution. He creates a rule, Bill Gothard, to protect his brother. He creates a rule within the IBLP making it impermissible to gossip. So essentially, nobody's allowed to gossip because that would keep everybody quiet. And so it would keep him and his brothers' indiscretions, we'll call them, under wraps. So he literally made a rule that you're not allowed to gossip. So you're not allowed to use your voice, essentially, within this institution. And they talk about in the documentary, and this is really gross, trigger warning, that Bill Gothard had a type. And he would vet young girls out through the Journey to the Heart conference, which is put on by the IBLP, where many girls attend. And he would approach these girls at this conference and say, "Hey, do you want to come work with me at headquarters?" And now headquarters was everything to these younger people within the IBLP. It would have been a big deal and a big accomplishment to go work at headquarters. And Bill Gothard used that when he approached them, like, "Hey, you want to come work with me at headquarters?" And this was really just him, allegedly, vetting out girls for bad reasons. And Bill told these young girls, according to people who participated in this documentary, that he was their new authority. And then he would ask them if they were virgins. Now, I can't think of many positive reasons or logical reasons why any older man would ask a young girl if she's a virgin. I just can't, especially not in a religious organization. What does that have to do with anything? So you can kind of see where this is going. It's extremely predatory and alarming behavior on Bill Gothard's part. And in 2018, Bill Gothard is in fact removed from the IBLP leadership due to numerous sexual misconduct allegations. And at that point, the organization, the IBLP, had about $90 million in assets up for grabs. And it had been alleged that Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar were going to be Bill Gothard's replacement in the IBLP head seat. Now, in 2019, it's more bad news regarding Josh Duggar. Things are only getting worse. He catches a federal case for possession of child pornography, and it is charged that, he downloaded and had physical photos of absolutely awful child pornography. And trigger warning, but some of this pornography included babies less than a year old. It just tells you exactly who Josh Duggar is, which in my mind, he's somebody who should never be a free person. I don't know how, and I'm not an expert, but to have somebody like him in the free world when children exist is just unsafe. And during this time, Jim Bob is running for Arkansas State Senate while his son Josh is on trial for possessing child pornography. And luckily, maybe some people say unluckily, but I say luckily, Jim Bob loses in a landslide. The documentary talks about the Joshua generation, and these are a younger generation of Christians. And essentially, it's the same book, just a different cover as the IBLP. It's the newer generation of very conservative Christians. A lot of the culture is very much the same as what was taught within the IBLP, but it's talked about in the documentary that they essentially, the goal is still to get these Joshua generation kids as adults, to propel them to the highest seats in government. So the Joshua generation, they essentially take the best and brightest and they try to propel them to the highest seats in government so that they can continue to push the country back to where it's supposed to be. I don't know, for just to kind of dumb it down a little bit. In 2022, Josh Duggar is found guilty of receiving child porn, and he's sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison. And in the aftermath of Bill Gothard being removed from the IBLP leadership, 10 women sue Bill Gothard and the IBLP for sex crimes. Now, unfortunately, and this is so sad, but this does happen, the statute of limitations was over, and so the lawsuit was dropped. Now, these women still to this day, they stand by their claims, but they had to drop the lawsuit because the statute of limitations would not allow them to move forward against Bill Gothard. And disgustingly, Bill Gothard declares victory on social media, like on Twitter. What a piece of shit. Like he knows that the only reason they dropped their lawsuit against him was not because they're like, oh yeah, maybe he didn't do it, or we don't really, we're going to back off, or we were lying. No, they stand by it. They absolutely stand by it and still to this day claim that he committed sex crimes, but the statute of limitations had run out. That is it. So for him to declare victory on social media, this is no victory. This is really just a loophole, a legal loophole that you're lucky that the statute of limitations had run out, which by the way, we need to work on that because as we know, so many women who are the victim of sex crimes, it takes many, many years, if not decades, if not ever, for them to come out and talk about what happened to them and name their accusers for many reasons, which we won't get into, but I think we all know by now. That is a real statistic, and that does not mean that they're lying. They should not be questioned for waiting so long to come out and name their accuser or to be ready to talk about what happened to them. There are many reasons why that happens, and it is a very glaring pattern in sex abuse victims. And Bill Gothard is a real piece of shit. If you didn't already know that, but at this point in this episode, he's a real piece of shit, as evidenced by the fact that after these women tried to sue him, but reluctantly had to drop the lawsuit due to the statute of limitations running out, he went and exposed private medical information about one of the plaintiffs on his Facebook page. So he's just further victimizing these women. According to 17.com, 88-year-old Bill Gothard is currently living a low-key life in LaGrange, Illinois. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. And he, of course, like I said earlier, he's no longer a leader of IBLP. And there's speculation recently that Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar may be heavily involved in the leadership of the organization as of today's date, although that has not been confirmed by the Duggars or anywhere else that I've seen. It's reported that Jim, Bob, and Michelle still live in the family home at Tontitown, Arkansas. Is that how you say it? Tontitown, Arkansas. And they are still involved in the IBLP, which is very alarming. Now, Jim, Bob, and Michelle did release a statement after the documentary was released, and they basically blamed entertainment, saying something like, that's the direction of entertainment these days. So they're essentially claiming that that's just entertainment. Entertainment likes to paint people in a derogatory way because it makes really good TV and shock value. No, it's not entertainment. It's actually, these people in the documentary know you, and they know you very well. These are members of your own family and your close circle who are coming forward with the truth about how you, the Duggars, raise your children and allegedly abuse your children, and the toxic teachings of the organization that you are associated with. So don't try to deflect and say, oh, that's just entertainment. Yeah, we all know that sometimes entertainment can be toxic, and reality shows in particular, maybe they do, do things for shock value, and it's not so great. But no, this documentary is very clear. These are people that know you very well, your own family members, and you've been exposed by people who know you well, and I have no reason to not believe these people who are coming forward and saying these things about you and how you raise your children and how you allegedly abuse your children and how you are allegedly raising children to maybe be future predators and victims of crimes. And I have very strong feelings about this, if you can't tell already. According to online sources, Anna Duggar, who is Josh Duggar's wife, Josh Duggar is now in prison for very serious charges. Anna Duggar, his wife, also lives on the Duggar family compound in Tontitown along with her 7 kids. So she's living with Josh Duggar's parents, Jim Bob and Michelle, and her 7 children that she has with Josh, which is extremely sad because their father's in prison for a very long time. Now, back to Jim and Bobby Holt. These were the very good friends of Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. They ended up separating after appearing in the documentary. They were together when they appeared in the documentary. And Bobby subsequently has been awarded a temporary protection order in April of 2003 against Jim. And Jim, by the way, is a former state senator. In May of 2023, a month after she was issued that order, an Arkansas judge granted a final protection order for Bobby Holt against her estranged husband, Jim Holt, which is lasting 10 years. So something serious went down for her to file for a protection order and for it to be granted for the next 10 years. And in addition to that, the couple's son has also requested an order of protection against his father, Jim Holt. My final thoughts on this are, like I said earlier, the major thing that I just kept thinking is the raising children this way, boys and girls, is extremely dangerous because it's a breeding ground for predators, young and old. You're raising young boys to take zero accountability for how they look at and how they treat and how they touch and how they interact with women. And I just hate everything about that. You're robbing girls of their education, their career, and their freedom within this lifestyle. The principles that are being taught by IBLP come from a dude who had numerous sexual misconduct allegations leveled against him. So if that tells you anything, it's like, why does the IBLP still exist if all the teachings come from this guy who's been removed because he has all these horrible allegations against him? Burn this shit to the ground and start over from scratch. What is left to teach these people that came from a dude who has a diseased mind, in my opinion? And I would just say, as a warning to women and girls, I mean, be aware of any man who's been raised in the IBLP or as part of the Joshua generation. And I say that, and of course, I'm not saying that every man who, was raised within the IBLP teachings or is part of the Joshua generation, I'm not saying that they are all predators. I'm just saying women and girls, people in general, be on alert if you're thinking about making one of these men your partner, because the way that they were raised is, like I said earlier, to take no accountability for doing things that are inappropriate. Okay, so I don't know. I would tell my own daughters to heed that advice. All right, you guys, this was a really tough one. I say that every time, but these are really tough. I have such strong opinions about these, but this one in particular was a tough one. I want to hear everything you have to say about this documentary. So after you've had a chance, after you've watched this video on YouTube for serial streamers, or you've listened to the episode on Murderish podcast, go back to Instagram at Jami on Air, and I want you to share all your thoughts, because I always do a video where I kind of like open up the chat, and that's when we all kind of just talk about this documentary in the comments. So I want to hear what you guys think. I don't know, I feel like I was pretty harsh in this episode, but I have very strong opinions about this, as you've seen and heard just now. So I want to see if you guys share any of my opinions about any of this. But yeah, let's talk in the comments. I'd love to hear everything you have to say about it. Thanks so much for watching and listening, you guys. If you're listening right now in the Murderish podcast feed, and you want to see video of this, it's available on my YouTube channel at Jami on Air. Conversely, if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to catch it on the podcast form, go to the Murderish podcast feed, hit subscribe, and every other Friday you will get a brand new Serial Streamers episode. All right, you guys, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you watching. I will see you very soon for another episode of Serial Streamers. Bye.